Hey there! Tonight, we're going to step into the gritty, often overlooked world of Victorian rat catchers, the men and women who worked tirelessly behind the scenes to keep the bustling cities of 19th century England as free from vermin as possible. What tools and techniques did they use? And how did society view these often misunderstood workers? You'll discover the unique relationship between humans and animals like ferrets. Learn about the dangers rat catchers faced and see how their work played a vital role in keeping cities livable. So get ready to dive into the smoky alleys, dark cellars, and bustling streets as we uncover the hidden history of these essential workers. Let's get started. Life in Victorian times was filled with crowded streets, overflowing rubbish heaps, and poor sanitation, all of which made rats a constant and serious problem. These creatures weren't just a nuisance. They threatened public health and the very safety of the communities. But what was it really like to be a rat catcher during this era? How did they track and capture these clever and elusive pests? Tonight, we'll explore the daily life, challenges, and skills of Victorian rat catchers. You step into Victorian England, a world of rapid change, industrial growth, and swelling cities packed with people, animals, and unfortunately, rats. The streets you walk are narrow and often filthy, lined with brick and timber houses piled close together. They swarm markets, gnaw through food stores, and infiltrate homes, spreading fear and frustration. This is your job if you are a rat catcher in Victorian England. You are called upon to manage the vermin that infest the dark corners of the urban landscape, to chase and trap creatures that seem almost as clever and elusive as you. It's dirty work, sometimes dangerous, always demanding knowledge, skill, and resilience. To be effective, you need an intimate understanding of rat behavior, where they hide, when they're active, what attracts them. Rats are intelligent and cautious. You often find yourself crawling through narrow, dark cellars filled with refuse and dampness, or walking the labyrinth of sewers beneath the streets. Society looked down on you because of the dirt and dangers associated with your job. You might face suspicion, isolation, or ridicule. Yet you performed a vital public service, and in some places, your efforts were formally recognized and rewarded by local authorities or businesses. In warmer months, when rats were more active and breeding, you might be out before dawn, checking traps and setting new ones. Landlords wanted proof of your effectiveness. Shopkeepers demanded quick results. Families feared infestations. Your reputation could make or break your livelihood. Stories of your bravery or skill might be whispered in the streets, or you might be scorned for failures or shortcuts. It was a tough life, but one that shaped the very fabric of Victorian urban living. Winter brought its own challenges, with rats seeking warmth indoors, making them harder to catch. You are not just a pest controller, but a guardian of public health, a master of animal behavior, and a survivor in one of the most challenging urban environments of the time. As we continue, you'll discover more about the tools you use, the strategies you employ, and the remarkable world you navigate in your daily work. You learn to read subtle signs and adapt your methods to keep pace with the clever rodents. Contracts could be made with landlords, merchants, or the city council itself, all desperate to keep rats at bay. The smell of decay and stagnant water is constant. The Victorian era saw the rise of new sanitation laws, urban planning efforts, and scientific understanding of disease. Pest control began to be seen as part of a larger system of public health, and new techniques and chemicals were introduced. You needed to stay informed, learn new skills, and sometimes train apprentices to continue your work. Rats scatter at the light of your lantern, but their rapid movements and sharp teeth keep you alert. Despite the hardships, your work is necessary. The city depends on you to keep rat numbers under control and protect food stores from destruction. They avoid new objects in their environment, so placing traps requires patience and strategy. You might observe their trails in the dirt, notice gnaw marks on wood or food containers, or listen for the faint scratching sounds in walls or cellars. Your knowledge allows you to predict where rats will be most active and to tailor your methods accordingly. But they're more than just pests. These rats carry disease, spoil precious food supplies, and threaten the fragile health of the city's inhabitants. Simple spring traps, cages, and poison might be common, but many rat catchers rely on ferrets trained to chase rats out of their hiding places. These small, agile animals become your partners in the hunt. Caring for them demands attention, feeding, and training. Sometimes you even use terriers or other dogs to flush out rats from hard-to-reach spots. Controlling their numbers is not merely a matter of comfort. It's a vital public health concern. Waste piles up in gutters and alleyways, and the air carries the unmistakable stench of refuse mixed with smoke from countless chimneys. In this world, rats thrive. Rats are everywhere, scurrying beneath your feet, slipping through cracks, darting across rooftops. While the true vectors of illnesses like cholera and typhoid were still poorly understood, rats and their fleas were suspected carriers of plague and other infections. Public health reformers increasingly recognized that managing rat populations was crucial in controlling outbreaks and improving city hygiene. You, as a rat catcher, became an indispensable part of these efforts. Enter the rat catcher, a figure essential to the city's well-being, but often overlooked and misunderstood. Why was rat catching so important during this time? The answer lies in the explosive growth of cities brought about by the Industrial Revolution. Between 1800 and 1900, Britain's population nearly tripled. People flocked to urban centers seeking work in factories and mills, creating overcrowded slums with inadequate sanitation. Sewers were often open ditches, streets were littered with garbage, and waste disposal systems barely kept pace with the influx of people. In this environment, rats found an ideal habitat. Not just a nuisance, rats were closely linked to some of the deadliest diseases of the era. Your work involves much more than simply setting traps or killing rats. Your tools of the trade are varied. Your working conditions are challenging. Rat catchers were usually from working-class backgrounds, often struggling to earn a living. As a rat catcher, you also had to adapt to changing times. Your daily routine varied with the season and the city's needs. Beyond the technical work, you also interacted with the community. In this section, you've glimpsed the importance and complexity of being a rat catcher in Victorian England. If you're a Victorian rat catcher, your tools are your lifeline. Without the right equipment, your chances of catching enough rats to earn a living would be slim. Over years of trial, error, and tradition, rat catchers developed a unique arsenal designed to outwit some of the most cunning urban pests of the time. From traps and cages to animals specially trained to flush out or capture rats, your toolkit reflects both the brutality and the cleverness needed for your daily work. One of the most basic and essential tools in your collection is the rat trap. You wait outside with a long leash, ready to pull the ferret out once it flushes the rats. These dogs are energetic, sharp, and highly responsive to commands. They're especially useful in open areas like barns or warehouses, where they can run freely to chase rats into corners or traps. You use whatever attracts rats best, often scraps of meat, cheese, or bread soaked in fats or syrups. Sometimes you rely on smells like fish or strong-smelling plants to lure rats out of hiding. Thick boots, gloves, and heavy coats help keep grime off your skin and reduce bites or scratches from rats. Some rat catchers wear masks or cloths over their faces to block the worst odors and airborne particles, but such items are often scarce or rudimentary. Early poisons, like arsenic or strychnine, were introduced to kill rats more efficiently, but their use required caution due to the risk to humans and pets. The Victorian era's industrial innovations slowly influenced rat catching, though tradition and hands-on skill remain dominant. Often, you craft homemade tools, improvised traps fashioned from scrap metal, custom-made cages, or bait mixes using local ingredients. It combines simple mechanics, trained animals, bait knowledge, and evolving technology. The tools you carry define your ability to succeed in an often grim and challenging line of work. Without them, your chances of controlling the relentless rat population would dwindle. But with skill, care, and persistence, your tools become extensions of yourself, helping you keep the city's pests in check and the streets safer for everyone. Your resourcefulness helps you adapt to different environments, from filthy urban cellars to rural barns. Each job requires a unique approach, and your tools must be flexible and reliable. Your willingness to adopt new tools or techniques could set you apart from others in your profession. Some rat catchers experimented with these substances, balancing their effectiveness against the dangers involved. Using poisons expanded your toolkit, but also complicated your work, as you had to monitor treated areas carefully. Still, these few protections can make a significant difference over long days of work. Selecting and preparing bait is an art. Too strong, and it scares rats away. Too weak, and they ignore it. Rat catchers often exchange secrets and improve their techniques through word of mouth or informal gatherings. In this way, your tools are not just physical objects, but a collection of knowledge, practice, and experience. You might adjust your bait depending on the season, the rat population's behavior, or the specific area you're working in. Your ability to work well with these animals reflects your skill and reputation. Training dogs takes time and patience, but a good terrier is a prized companion in your line of work. Sometimes the ferret emerges with a rat in tow, or you might have to trap the fleeing rats yourself. These are made from woven wicker or tough leather, designed to hold your gear and your catch. The basket needs to be durable, but lightweight enough to carry through crowded streets and up narrow staircases. Inside, you keep your traps, bait, extra rope or string, and sometimes food and water for your animals. Organization is crucial when you're moving quickly from one job to the next. Fumbling for a tool wastes precious time. Ferrets are also susceptible to injury or disease, so maintaining their health is a constant concern. But no tool is more effective for deep or hidden infestations than your trusty ferrets. You carry oil lamps or lanterns, sometimes just a candle or torch, to illuminate these gloomy spots. The flickering light casts shadows and makes movement difficult to detect, so your eyes and ears must be sharp. Light can also scare rats away, so you learn to move slowly and position your light carefully to avoid alarming your prey. These come in many forms, but the most common is the spring trap, a wooden or metal device designed to snap shut and catch a rat by the neck or body when triggered. These are designed to capture rats alive, useful if you want to keep them for demonstration, or sell them as bait to fishermen or other hunters. These small, slender animals are trained to hunt rats by entering their burrows or hiding places underground. Ferrets are fearless, quick, and flexible, able to slip through narrow tunnels that no human could follow. You take great care in raising and training your ferrets, feeding them well, and ensuring they respond to your commands. The relationship is symbiotic. The ferret helps you find and flush out rats, and you provide it with food and protection. The cages are usually metal wire or wood, with doors that shut once the rat enters after being lured by bait inside. Live traps require regular checking. You can't afford to leave a rat trapped for too long, or it will escape or injure itself, reducing its value. You place bait off in food scraps or something with a strong smell on a trigger plate. When a rat steps onto it, the trap snaps quickly, ideally catching the rat instantly. Spring traps vary in size and sensitivity. Some are simple homemade devices, others more sophisticated manufactured ones. Setting them requires patience. You know, rats are cautious creatures, so you often bait traps without setting them first, allowing rats to get used to their presence before activating the mechanism. But traps aren't your only option. You also carry cages or live traps. Beyond mechanical traps, One of your most valuable assets is your ferrets. Using ferrets isn't without risk or difficulty. When a ferret dives into a rat's burrow, a scuffle often follows. You might also employ terriers or other small dogs trained to hunt and chase rats. For carrying your tools and caught rats, you often rely on a sturdy basket or bag. Bait itself is another critical component of your toolkit. Lighting is also important in your work. Many infestations occur in dark, damp places, cellars, basements, and sewers where natural light rarely reaches. When working in sewers or particularly hazardous environments, you might wear protective clothing, though protective is relative. You also rely on knowledge passed down from other rat catchers, tips on how to set traps for specific rat species, how to detect their nests, and how to avoid traps becoming trap shy after repeated failures. With the rise of Victorian science and public health initiatives, new tools and chemicals began to appear. You might also encounter early mechanical devices, such as spring-loaded traps with more sensitive triggers or designs meant to kill multiple rats at once. Finally, your personal ingenuity plays a major role. In sum, your toolbox is as much a symbol of your expertise as it is a practical necessity. If you want to be a successful Victorian rat catcher, knowing your enemy is just as important as having the right tools. Rats are clever, cautious, and surprisingly adaptable creatures. You quickly learn that catching them isn't just about setting traps and waiting. It's about understanding how they live, where they hide, and how they move. Late evenings or pre-dawn hours become your prime working times. Instead, you discover several smaller groups or colonies, each defending their own patch. When you trap or kill a rat, the vacancy often attracts others nearby, but the territory doesn't stay empty for long. This territorial instinct means that clearing rats from one area is a constant battle. As soon as you remove one group, others move in. Rats are opportunistic feeders, willing to eat almost anything, but they prefer foods high in fat, protein, and carbohydrates. You learn to tailor your bait depending on the season and local availability. You witness them avoiding traps, learning from near captures, and even stealing bait without triggering mechanisms. The brown rat, or Norway rat, is larger and tends to burrow extensively, while the black rat is more agile and prefers elevated nesting spots. Recognizing these roles helps you anticipate where the most active rats will be at any time. You might find sentries near entrances or open areas, making them more vulnerable to traps, while nursing females stay deeper in nests. Sharing information on rat runs, breeding sites, and effective traps helps everyone stay ahead of the rodents. You might even mark infested areas with chalk or paint as warnings for others, a primitive form of pest control communication. The more you observe and adapt, the better you become at keeping the relentless tide of rats under control. Your success isn't just measured by the number caught, but by how well you read the invisible lines they leave behind the silent, shadowy traces of a city's most elusive residents. Understanding which species you're dealing with helps you choose the right tools and approach. Rats avoid areas with frequent disturbances, but are bold in neglected, dirty places with easy food access. You learn that human habits, like where rubbish piles up or where animals are fed, influence rat populations heavily. Your work often involves advising property owners on sanitation to reduce rat habitats, blending pest control with public education. For example, brown rats are more likely to be caught with ground traps, while black rats might require cage traps set higher off the floor. This behavior challenges you to innovate continually. You experiment with new trap designs, fresh bait types, and unexpected placements to outwit their growing wariness. In colder months, you use richer baits, while in summer, lighter, sweeter foods work better. You observe what foods rats target in the area you're working bread scraps, stored grains, fish waste, and adjust your strategies accordingly. Your job becomes a continuous effort of monitoring and trapping. In daylight, Rats lie low, motionless in their nests, conserving energy and avoiding predators. They use squeaks, foot tapping, and tail flicks to send warnings or signals to others. Rats test your limits with their cunning and resilience, but with close observation, you begin to predict their moves. You become a student of their patterns, learning when and where they'll appear, how they respond to threats, and where their weaknesses lie. This deep understanding becomes your secret weapon. When you disturb a nest or make too much noise, you see the rats react swiftly, disappearing into cracks or holes with alarming speed. This alertness makes catching them tricky. You have to move slowly and carefully, minimizing noise and vibration. Your experience teaches you how to approach nests without triggering a full evacuation. But as darkness falls, they emerge, foraging, socializing, and defending territory. Rats reproduce rapidly, with females capable of producing several litters a year. You understand that leaving even a few rats alive means the problem will soon spiral out of control again. This knowledge drives you to be thorough and relentless. Catching rats isn't a one-time task, but a sustained campaign against a multiplying enemy. You learn to be patient, sitting quietly with your traps armed, but not yet triggered, waiting for movement in the shadows. Without this knowledge, your traps stay empty, your cages untouched, and the rats keep multiplying. In such times, you find them in unusual places: attics, chimneys, or inside walls. Hot, dry spells push them toward water sources like wells or leaking pipes. You become adept at reading the signs nature gives you to anticipate rat movement and adjust your tactics. Your first lesson is that rats are creatures of habit. They don't roam randomly. Instead, they follow established paths called runs. These are narrow trails along walls, behind furniture, or through dark corners where rats travel regularly. Rats avoid open spaces and light, preferring dark, sheltered spots close to food and water. In the city's cramped alleys, you find them burrowing under floorboards, inside wall cavities, beneath piles of rubbish, or in cellar corners where damp meets shadow. In barns or stables, they nest in haylofts, feed bins, and behind loose stones. The key to successful rat catching is locating these nests and understanding their layout. You often have to crawl into tight spaces, disturbing cobwebs and dust, to glimpse the tunnels and chambers rats call home. By observing these runs, you can predict where rats will appear next. You learn to spot the subtle signs: smudges of oily fur left by repeated contact with walls, scratches on wood or plaster, droppings, and even faint smells of urine. Every sign points to a well-used route, a clue to placing your traps where they're most effective. Hiding places matter enormously. Rats are nocturnal by nature, most active after dusk, when the streets quiet and human activity slows. You quickly adjust your schedule to match theirs. Rats also display strong territorial behavior. You rarely find large groups of them in one spot, unless the area is rich in food and shelter. You notice that rats communicate in subtle ways. The breeding habits of rats also influence your work. Diet affects rat behavior significantly. Environmental factors, like weather, also shape rat activity. Heavy rain floods burrows and nests, forcing rats to seek higher ground or shelter indoors. Rats are not just mindless pests. They're intelligent problem solvers. You also pay attention to the differences between common rat species. Social structure within rat colonies reveals more complexity. Some rats act as sentries, alerting others to danger, while others focus on foraging or caring for young. Tracking rats also means studying their movements in relation to humans. Sometimes you collaborate with other rat catchers or city officials to map out rat-infested zones. Patience is your greatest virtue. In the end, studying rat behavior transforms your work from brute force to strategic pursuit. Your day as a Victorian rat catcher begins long before the streets wake. The city is still cloaked in dawn's dim light, the fog lingering thick over cobblestones and alleyways. While most people are still asleep, you are already awake, preparing for the long hours ahead. You move with purpose, your senses alert to every sign of rat activity. You follow known runs, the greasy trails rats leave as they skitter along walls or squeeze through cracks. You inspect rubbish heaps, market stalls, stables, and cellar entrances. You visit local pubs or taverns, where you might share news with fellow rat catchers or city officials, trading tips on rat activity or new trapping techniques. Each setting demands different tactics. In grain stores, you use traps with sweet baits, watching carefully for signs of chewing or droppings. In stables, you might release ferrets to chase rats from their hiding spots, while keeping an eye out for angry horses and the ever-present dirt and manure. This social time is vital. It helps you stay informed about new infestations or changes in rat behavior after weather shifts or city repairs. Cold winters bring frozen mud and icy streets, making travel slow and dangerous. The city becomes familiar in a way few others understand. You face danger from the city's environment, the risk of falls in dark alleys, encounters with angry dogs or hostile residents, and the constant threat of disease lurking in every corner. Your body grows tired from long hours of bending, crawling, and hauling heavy cages. Your hands become calloused, your boots worn thin, and your clothes patched and stained. You know the best hiding spots, the safest pathways, and the neighborhoods where the rats fight hardest to survive. Every rat caught means fewer rodents spreading disease or spoiling food. You clean your equipment, tend to your traps, and prepare for the next day's battles. Your rest is brief because the rats never sleep for long. Tomorrow will bring the same challenges, the same murky streets, and the same relentless pursuit. Every cleared cellar or stable makes the city a cleaner, safer place. You know your work is vital, even if it often goes unnoticed by those you protect. You develop a keen sense of timing, when to move, when to wait, and when to strike. Your reputation grows among shopkeepers, tavern owners, and householders who rely on your skill to keep their homes and businesses rat-free. Hot summers bring swarms of flies and a different kind of smell from the rotting refuse. Yet the rats adapt, and so do you. You learn to adjust your gear, your bait, and your routes with the seasons, always chasing the invisible enemy. This record helps you plan follow-up visits and alerts city health officials to problem areas. Every place where food scraps accumulate is a potential rat haven, and a stubborn determination to keep one step ahead of one of the city's oldest and most cunning inhabitants. The gas lamps flicker along the main roads, but alleys and back streets remain shrouded in darkness. You carry a lantern and move quietly, listening for the telltale rustling or squeaking. In this shadowy world, you are both hunter and guardian, balancing the risks of the job with the knowledge that your work protects countless families from contamination and ruin. Rats are nocturnal, so dusk signals the start of their busiest hours. You double back to your morning trap placements, checking cages, resetting snares, and adding fresh bait. You are patient but efficient, aware that every empty trap is a chance lost to control the growing rat population. Your livelihood depends on your skill and stamina, and the city's health depends on your relentless patrols through its murky corners and forgotten tunnels. You start by checking your equipment. Your leather satchel holds traps of various sizes, some snap traps, some cage-like contraptions designed to hold live rats. You also carry a coil of rope, a sturdy cane for probing into dark holes, and perhaps a trusty ferret or two, trained to root out rats from their dens. Your clothing is practical and worn a thick coat against the chill, sturdy boots for long hours on rough ground, and a wide-brimmed hat to keep rain and soot out of your eyes. By first light, you're on the streets. The city is quiet, except for the distant clatter of carts and the occasional bark of a dog. Your morning might begin in the markets, where yesterday's spoiled produce and discarded bones form a banquet for hungry rodents. You set traps near refuse piles, baiting them with bread crusts, cheese, or bits of meat. These narrow passages are often dark and damp, ideal for rats to breed and hide. You inspect sewer grates and drainage holes, tapping your cane to listen for movement below. The sewers themselves are a dangerous territory, filled with waste and disease, but also the heart of rat infestations. If conditions allow, you enter with a lantern, your boots squelching through muck as you peer into shadowed tunnels, ready to capture any rat brave enough to reveal itself. Here, rats are bold, sometimes darting just beyond your reach. You learn their patterns quickly. Some areas swarm with young rats, while others shelter the cautious elders. Next, you move into the alleys and side streets. Midday offers a brief respite, though you rarely stop completely. Afternoon hours are spent on more challenging grounds. Warehouses storing grain, stables housing horses, or even residential cellars where rats sneak in through cracks in foundation walls. You also keep detailed mental notes, or sometimes a written journal tracking the success of your traps. Locations where rats seem to be increasing, and times of day when activity peaks. Evening brings the most intense work. Night rounds take you deep into the city's underbelly. Rain or shine, your routine barely changes. Despite the hardships, there is a strange rhythm to your work. But life as a rat catcher isn't without challenges. Yet the satisfaction of a job well done is unmatched. At the end of the day, you return home weary but fulfilled. Being a Victorian rat catcher is more than a job. It's a lifestyle defined by perseverance, skill. Your work as a rat catcher places you in a complicated position within Victorian society. On one hand, your job is essential. You are a frontline defender against the pests that threaten public health and the economy. The crowded, industrializing cities of Victorian England are hotbeds of disease and poverty, and rats are everywhere, ubiquitous and unrelenting. Your role is to control these pests, and without your daily patrols and traps, the problems would spiral further out of control. Still, the general public rarely celebrates your efforts. Instead, many see your job as dirty, unpleasant, and beneath the dignity of respectable labor. Your clothing is often stained and worn, your hands roughened by labor. You smell of smoke, sweat, and something indefinable, part birth, part decay, that marks you as different. This visible otherness further isolates you from those who enjoy cleaner, more orderly lives. Public health officials, local constables, and merchants who depend on clean premises recognize the value of your work. These relationships can sometimes open doors, perhaps a recommendation for a steady contract, or access to resources like better traps or assistance. In wealthier districts, your presence might be less welcomed, the fear of rats intertwined with concerns about property value and social standing. Instead, they appear as part of the gritty urban backdrop, a symbol of the city's grime and struggle. This representation reinforces the social invisibility you face, as your labor is taken for granted or reduced to stereotype. Here, you might encounter more suspicion or hostility, and your work may be subject to greater scrutiny. In poorer neighborhoods, where rat infestations are a daily reality and resources are scarce, your role might be viewed more pragmatically, if still without much fanfare. Yet even these allies often maintain a professional distance, acknowledging your role without elevating your status. Without you and your traps, rats would swarm unchecked, spreading filth, damaging goods, and invading homes. You take pride in protecting your community from a relentless enemy, contributing to public health in a very real way. And markets, you carry the weight of your social standing with a mix of resilience and quiet defiance. Your life is tough, your job dirty, but your role is vital. You navigate a world that both needs and shuns you, balancing survival with service in the shadows of a rapidly changing city. Your knowledge of the city as hidden corners and rat habits makes you indispensable to those who understand the stakes. Your daily efforts, though often overlooked, form part of the essential maintenance that keeps a bustling Victorian city functioning. Some people consider rat catching a shameful profession, one best kept quiet. Other rat catchers, sewer workers, and city laborers understand the hardships you face and share a bond forged in grime and grit. These relationships become vital, offering support, camaraderie, and practical advice. A rat catcher who is known for effectiveness, reliability, and discretion might find clients who trust and appreciate his work, helping to secure steady employment and a modest level of community acceptance. Conversely, those who are careless or unsuccessful may struggle to find work and endure harsher social stigma. Stories swap between you about clever traps, the biggest catches, or narrow escapes from dangerous dogs or hostile residents. This informal network is a lifeline in a world where formal support or recognition is scarce. You may have learned early on not to boast about your work in polite company, knowing it could invite ridicule or exclusion. Instead, you carry your trade with quiet pride, aware of its importance, but resigned to society's judgment. Passers-by may avoid eye contact or cross to the other side, unwilling to associate with someone who deals with rats and refuse. Children might point and laugh, while shopkeepers look at you with suspicion, worried about the odors clinging to your clothes or the grimy tools you carry. At times, your very presence near a business or home can cause customers to pause or turn away, fearing contamination or infestation. Yet despite this importance, you often find yourself on the fringes of respectability, living in a world that views your profession with a mixture of disdain, suspicion, and sometimes outright fear. Unlike blacksmiths, carpenters, or even street vendors, rat catchers have few formal organizations or guilds. You are often a solitary figure, relying on word of mouth and local reputation to find work. Many rat catchers are self-employed or work on commission, paid only when rats are caught and delivered. This precarious financial situation adds to your social vulnerability. You live on the edge, with income fluctuating seasonally or as infestations rise and fall. From the outset, society treats rat catchers as a necessary evil. Walking through the streets, you can feel the looks and hear the whispers. Despite the critical nature of your work, rat catching is not a trade that commands social prestige. Your neighbors may regard you with wariness, knowing that your job requires you to frequent the city's darkest, most neglected places, sewers, garbage heaps, and alleyways where rats thrive. At social events or community gatherings, your occupation might be a subject avoided or met with thinly veiled disdain. Within your own circles, however, you find solidarity. Interestingly, some segments of society regard you with grudging respect. Your reputation can also be influenced by your success and professionalism. There are also local variations in how rat catchers are perceived. In literature and popular culture of the Victorian era, rat catchers rarely feature as heroes or notable figures. Despite these challenges, many rat catchers find dignity in their work. At the end of the day, when you return home after long hours navigating alleys, sewers, your work as a rat catcher demands more than just skill with traps and a keen eye for rodent behavior. It requires you to brave some of the most challenging and unpleasant environments a city has to offer. The air grows heavier as you approach a narrow cellar or hatch leading into the labyrinth of sewers. Beneath your feet, water pools in uneven patches, sometimes deep enough to soak your boots. Every step is a gamble. You can always see what lies beneath the surface or around the corner. The risk of slipping, falling, or stepping into deeper holes is constant. Rubbish heaps and refuse dumps present their own unique challenges. Without modern sanitation or knowledge of germ theory, you live with the constant threat of infection from cuts, bites, or simply breathing contaminated air. Many rat catchers fall ill at some point. Fevers, rashes, stomach troubles are common complaints. You must move slowly, using your hands to feel ahead when visibility fails. One wrong step could lead to injury or getting trapped. These confined spaces might be cleaner than sewers, but are often cluttered with barrels, crates, and old furniture that limits your movement. Dust and cobwebs coat every surface, and poor lighting forces you to rely on your hands and memory to navigate. The fear of being trapped or locked inside is ever present, especially if you work alone. When standard traps won't work in a narrow tunnel or a slippery refuse pile, you modify your methods using bait, nets, or even your own hands with gloves to capture elusive rats. Creativity and adaptability become as important as strength and endurance. The darkness also makes it hard to spot rat nests or signs of infestation, forcing you to rely on experience and intuition. But it also means holding the line against a persistent threat, protecting homes, shops, and streets from the chaos rats can bring. It is a gritty, demanding life, one that tests your courage, endurance, and resolve every single day. Some might bar doors or refuse access, forcing you to find alternative routes or times to do your work. The darkness, the smells, the danger, they have become part of your daily life, shaping your routines and your resilience. You gain a unique knowledge of the city's underbelly, knowing places few dare to go. Others may watch you with suspicion, worrying that you bring rats in rather than remove them. Negotiating entry and managing these social challenges is another aspect of your demanding job. You learn to carry basic remedies, herbal salves, or even just hope that your body's resilience will carry you through. Your body becomes accustomed to cramped positions and awkward movements, and your reflexes sharpen to avoid hazards quickly. Over time, you learn to read the subtle signs of a rat's presence: scattered droppings, gnawed wood, faint sounds that guide you even when you can't see clearly. These piles of discarded food, broken furniture, and household waste ferment under the sun, producing clouds of flies and swarms of vermin. Sometimes you hear the faint hum of human voices above, reminding you that the city teems with life just beyond the underground gloom. Your hands crack and bleed from constant contact with rough surfaces and grime, yet the work must continue. Every rat caught reduces the risk of infestation and disease for the community. Other times, the silence is so complete it becomes oppressive, heightening your sense of vulnerability. Rats thrive in these smelly, shifting mountains of decay, and hunting them here requires patience and careful footing. The risk of encountering sharp glass, nails, or other hazardous debris is high, and even a simple fall could lead to injury. You learn to time your movements, stepping back or pausing to catch fresh air when possible. At times, toxic gases like methane from decomposing waste can accumulate, posing deadly risks. Though you lack modern gas detectors, the sharpness of your senses often alerts you before the air becomes unbearable. Sharp stones or rusty metal fragments, hidden in the muck, threaten cuts and scrapes that could become infected. The faint light of day fades quickly, replaced by the flicker of a lantern or candle in your trembling hand. The smell hits you first, a thick miasma of decay, stagnant water, and something sour and bitter that clings to your clothes and skin long after you emerge. But no gear can fully guard against the grime and filth you encounter. After hours spent crawling through narrow tunnels or crouching in low-ceilinged cellars, your clothes are soaked with water, sweat, and something darker you'd rather not think about. The damp seeps into your skin, chilling you to the bone in cold months and sticking uncomfortably in warmer ones. You learn to hold your breath when possible, but it's never enough to block out the stench entirely. Cellars damp and dark, sewers foul and suffocating, rubbish heaps piled high with filth, all become your workplace. Navigating these cramped, dirty, and smelly spaces is part of your daily reality, and understanding the risks involved is crucial for your survival and success. In the dark, they move quickly and unpredictably, sometimes startling you as they scurry past or leap from shadows. Though you are prepared with traps and tools, they are wild animals and can bite or scratch if cornered. Their teeth and claws carry germs and diseases, adding to the hazards of close encounters. Imagine starting your day, preparing to descend into the underground world beneath the city streets. The sewers are a maze of twisting tunnels and slick surfaces, lined with bricks that leak moisture and invite mold. Then there are the rats themselves, your targets, but also potential dangers. Your clothing offers little protection. Heavy boots, thick gloves, and a coarse jacket can shield against some hazards. Sewers and cellars are not the only difficult places you face. These environments are also breeding grounds for countless germs and bacteria. Noise adds another layer of challenge. The echoes of dripping water, distant rat squeaks, and the creak of wood or metal structures can disorient you in tight spaces. Lighting is rudimentary at best. Lanterns provide flickering, limited illumination that casts more shadows than it dispels. Ventilation is poor or non-existent. In some parts of the sewer system, the air is so foul and stagnant that breathing becomes difficult. Work in cellars, especially in wealthier homes or businesses, brings its own difficulties. You also face occasional hostility from property owners or residents who view your presence as a nuisance or insult. Despite these hardships, you develop a set of skills and habits that help you endure. You also become adept at improvising. The physical toll is undeniable. Long hours in these harsh environments leave you exhausted, sore, and often chilled to the bone. In moments of quiet between rounds, you sometimes pause to reflect on the strange relationship you have with these environments. Your role as a rat catcher means embracing discomfort and risk, often in solitude and without recognition. In your work as a Victorian rat catcher, you quickly realize that human skill alone isn't always enough to outwit the cunning, fast-moving rats that infest the city. To gain an edge, you rely heavily on some unusual allies-trained animals, the most important of which are ferrets. These small, agile creatures become your partners in the hunt, bringing unique abilities to flush out rats from their hidden nests, tunnels and dens where traps or nets can't reach. Ferrets are more than just pets. They are essential working animals, carefully trained and handled to assist in your dangerous and demanding profession. Ferrets are naturally inclined to hunt and chase, so you use this instinct to your advantage. Sometimes you use bait or toys to encourage the ferret to explore tight spaces and follow scents. You depend on their slender, flexible bodies and sharp instincts to chase rats into the open, making them easier to catch or kill. Injuries are common, and you keep basic first aid supplies handy. Dogs, for example, sometimes assist rat catchers by sniffing out infestations. Certain breeds known for their keen noses and determination can track rats in areas where ferrets can't reach. You may use terriers or other small dogs trained to pursue rodents. Ferrets can sustain bites or scratches, and untreated wounds can quickly become infected in the grimy environments where you work. Watching it disappear into the hole is always tense. You hope it will flush out the rats, not get stuck or injured. You listen carefully for its movements, scratching, or high-pitched noises which indicate it has found prey. Many rat catchers develop strong bonds with their animals, appreciating their personalities and quirks. Ferrets can be playful, mischievous, and affectionate when off duty. You spend downtime caring for them, playing, and making sure they are rested before the next hunt. Together, you navigate a world of dirt, danger, and shadow, hunting a pest that has plagued urban life for centuries. It's hard, sometimes frustrating work, but with the right animals at your side, the impossible becomes possible. Many households and businesses keep cats specifically to reduce rat populations. Others argue it's a practical necessity, a humane way to catch rats without resorting to poisons or traps that might harm other creatures or people. Sometimes the rats flee in panic, and the chase spills into the open. This is when your reflexes and preparedness matter most. They are your eyes and ears in dark, inaccessible places. Without them, Many rat catchers would struggle to keep up with the city's growing rat populations. You might sometimes cooperate with cat owners, or find that your traps work better in areas where cats roam freely. This communication is critical when working in complex, dangerous environments where you cannot always see your animal. These birds of prey are rarer and require significant skill to handle, but can be effective in specific circumstances. You might see demonstrations of falconry techniques applied to pest control in larger towns or cities. You learn to interpret the ferret's movements and sounds as signs of success or danger. But working with ferrets requires patience, skill, and a deep understanding of their nature. Training a ferret is no simple task. You might travel to a customer's home or a public building suspected of infestation. Your first task is to identify likely rat holes, cracks in walls, gaps beneath floorboards, or openings around cellar entrances. When you first acquire a young ferret, often a kit brought to you by a breeder or fellow rat catcher, you must begin by building trust. These creatures are naturally curious, but can be wary of humans. You spend time gently handling them, feeding them, and getting them used to your scent and voice. These animals require a balanced diet rich in protein, often raw meat or specially prepared feed. You make sure they stay healthy and strong, because a sick or weak ferret is useless on the job. Ferrets need regular exercise and a clean living space, conditions that can be difficult to maintain when you are always on the move through filthy streets and alleys. Ferrets respond best to calm, consistent care, and they need to bond with you to work effectively. Once the ferret trusts you, training begins. The goal is to teach it to enter rat holes and tunnels on command, and to pursue rats relentlessly without harming itself. You also train the ferret to respond to whistles, calls, or hand signals so that you can guide it during a hunt. Caring for ferrets is a constant responsibility. You also have to protect your ferrets from city hazards. Dogs, cats, and sometimes hostile rats themselves can threaten them. Other animals play supporting roles too. Cats, long celebrated as natural rat hunters, are less directly involved in your work, but still part of the broader pest control ecosystem. Some rat catchers also use specialized tools like hawks or owls, trained to catch rats in open spaces or warehouses. When it's time to hunt, you bring your ferrets along, often carrying them in specially designed cages or baskets. Once you find a promising spot, you release the ferret. When the ferret chases the rats out of their hiding places, they may bolt into your waiting traps, or you may catch them by hand or with nets. Your relationship with your ferrets is more than just utility. The use of ferrets isn't without controversy. Some consider the practice cruel to the animals, exposing them to danger and harsh conditions. Over time, you learn that success depends not just on your skills, but on how well you care for and work with your ferrets. In the busy streets and crowded alleys of Victorian cities, your ferrets become trusted partners in an ongoing battle. When you think about rat catching, your mind might immediately picture the crowded, smoky streets of Victorian London, teeming with rats and bustling crowds. But your job as a rat catcher isn't confined to the urban sprawl. You deal with rats in a concrete jungle where every building, cellar, and garbage heap offer shelter. You rely on traps that can be quickly set in narrow spaces, portable cages for capturing rats on the move, and your trusted ferrets to flush them out from deep within the labyrinth of cellars and tunnels. You spend long hours navigating tight, dark spaces, sewers thick with muck, basements reeking of stale beer and rotting food, markets piled high with discarded scraps. Rats have more space to hide, with fields, hedgerows, and abandoned outbuildings giving them shelter. Sometimes you use poison, though it's handled cautiously due to the risk to farm animals and pets. In rural settings, timing your work is critical. You might plan hunts for the cooler parts of the day when rats are most active, or coordinate with farmers during harvest seasons when rat populations can spike. You spend time observing signs of activity, droppings, chewed wood, disturbed earth, and setting traps along known rat paths and burrows. In the city, the dominant species is often the brown rat, aggressive and highly adaptable to human environments. Without the constant food waste and shelter of a city, these rats depend heavily on survival skills and can be highly nocturnal and secretive. The smell and filth that come with rat infestations never change, and you must always protect yourself from disease risks, wearing gloves, washing hands thoroughly, and avoiding contact with rat urine or droppings. Rats are carriers of various bacteria and parasites, so maintaining hygiene is crucial no matter where you work. You learn to move quietly, to avoid startling them, and to be patient. You see it firsthand as rats grow wary of traps and change their routes to avoid detection. This means you constantly have to innovate rotating bait types, moving trap locations, and sometimes combining different methods to outsmart them. Whether you're crouching in a dank city cellar or climbing into a dusty barn loft, the goal remains the same: outsmart the rats and protect your community from their relentless presence. Controlling rat populations helps protect food supplies, prevent structural damage, and reduce the spread of diseases. You become an unsung guardian of the community, working behind the scenes to keep homes and businesses safe from the damage caused by these relentless pests. Unlike city rats who dart in and out of sight, rural rats might vanish entirely for days, only to reappear when conditions are right. Some rat catchers become experts in urban infestations, skilled at navigating the claustrophobic and chaotic city underbelly. Others prefer the open spaces and challenges of the countryside, developing deep knowledge of rural pests and the rhythms of farm life. The lessons learned in one environment often inform your strategies in the other, and your experience grows richer with every job. In rural areas, you might also encounter black rats, which prefer higher places like barns and attics, or even water voles and field mice that mimic rat behavior. Knowing the differences is vital because it affects your trapping strategies, bait choices, and timing. Unlike the city, where you might focus on rapid trapping and flush-out operations, in the countryside, your work often spans days or even weeks as you monitor rat movements and adjust your methods accordingly. You may trek across muddy fields, climb into lofts, or crawl through tight spaces beneath floorboards and barn rafters. Weather plays a bigger role. Damp, cold, or intense heat can slow you down or affect your animal's performance. You might have to travel long distances between jobs, often carrying your equipment on foot or by horse. The sheer volume of rats is staggering, and their boldness is notorious. Residents might object to your methods, or you might face complaints about the noise and smell of your work. In rural communities, you often know your clients personally: farmers, millers, estate owners, and your reputation travels by word of mouth. Your work is more than just pest control. It's protecting livelihoods. Grain lost to rats can mean serious economic damage, and you might find yourself advising on preventive measures like better storage methods, repairing building damage, or improving sanitation. Sometimes you're called out by shopkeepers, frustrated by rats invading their goods, or by landlords desperate to protect their properties. Your work is fast-paced and often urgent, as rat populations explode in the crowded city and require constant control to prevent outbreaks of disease or damage to property. These urban rats are accustomed to humans. They scurry boldly even in broad daylight, weaving through crowds and slipping through cracks in the pavement. They have learned to exploit every nook and cranny, and they breed rapidly in such packed environments. The countryside, with its own unique environments and challenges, calls for a very different approach, and you quickly learn that rat catching in rural areas is a whole other world compared to the city. In the city, rats thrive in the dense, packed conditions, crammed tenements, bustling markets, dirty alleys, and overflowing sewers. When working in the city, your tools and techniques reflect this. The urban environment means you also have to be prepared for human interference. Contrast this with the countryside, where the rhythm of rat catching changes dramatically. Here, The population density is lower, and rats are less bold and more wary of humans. You'll find them in barns, haylofts, granaries, and around farm buildings, places where food stores are kept and where rats can gnaw their way through sacks of grain and stored crops. The rural rat might not face the same competition for food as city rats, but they can be just as destructive and just as clever. Your approach in rural areas often involves a lot more tracking and patience. The tools you use can also differ. While ferrets remain useful in rural rat hunting, you may rely more on snap traps and baiting strategies that suit larger spaces. Another big difference is the relationship with the local people. The countryside also presents physical challenges you don't face in the city. Interestingly, the species of rats can vary between urban and rural environments. One of the biggest challenges you face is that rural rats are often more elusive. Despite these differences, some challenges remain the same in both settings. Moreover, rats in both environments have a remarkable ability to adapt and learn. As you grow in your career, you might specialize in one environment or the other. Yet, no matter where you work, your job plays a vital role in public health and safety. By understanding the unique demands of both urban and rural rat catching, you equip yourself with a diverse skill set, making you a versatile and valuable professional. In the end, rat catching is as much about observation, patience, and adaptation as it is about traps and ferrets. As a rat catcher in Victorian England, you were more than just a pest controller. You were a frontline guardian of public health in some of the most crowded and disease-prone places on Earth. You might not have been seen as a hero, and your work was often dirty, smelly, and thankless, but the impact you had was profound. In an era before modern sanitation, vaccines, and antibiotics, rats were more than a nuisance. They were a serious threat to human health. While some of the diseases associated with rats were poorly understood at the time, the correlation between rat infestations and outbreaks of illnesses like typhus, dysentery, and cholera was widely recognized. The plague, which had devastated Europe centuries earlier, was remembered with terror, and rats were blamed as part of the problem, even if the exact transmission pathways were unclear. You faced the consequences daily: narrow, overcrowded streets lined with tenements lacking proper toilets, garbage dumped into gutters that never dried, and open drains that invited vermin. Your job wasn't just to catch rats, but to work in this environment and understand how their populations reflected the health of the community itself. When you walked the streets, alleys, and cellars hunting rats, you were participating in an early form of disease control. So by controlling rats, you indirectly improved the living conditions of thousands of people. Even when you cleared out an area, if the underlying issues, poor waste management, broken sewage, leaky water pipes were not fixed, rats would quickly return. You dealt with foul smells, dangerous environments like sewers and garbage heaps, and the ever-present risk of contamination. Protective gear was minimal, and the risk of illness was real. Yet your persistence helped communities function better in difficult times. In the meantime, your work helped fill the gap. Rat infestations contributed to the stigma attached to poor urban neighborhoods. You formed a crucial part of this network. The work you did behind the scenes set the stage for later advances in urban sanitation and disease prevention. Warmer months often mean more rats and more illnesses, while harsh winters slow rat activity. By controlling rats, you reduced the spread of deadly diseases in an era when medical treatments were limited. You were a vital part of the public health landscape, a line of defense against disease in some of the toughest living conditions imaginable. Every rat caught contributed to a healthier, safer environment for thousands. It reminds us that health is not just about medicine, but about environment, sanitation, and the quiet, persistent work of people like you who tackled the unseen threats. This seasonal cycle influences your workload and the urgency of control efforts. Your efforts help shape the future of urban health, laying the groundwork for cleaner, safer cities for generations to come. Without rat catchers actively reducing vermin populations, cities would have faced even greater challenges in controlling outbreaks. Areas plagued by rats were seen as dirty and undesirable. As knowledge of disease transmission improved, rat control became a formal part of municipal health efforts. Laws and regulations mandated vermin control in public buildings, markets, and transportation hubs. Your skills were in higher demand, and your profession began to gain some recognition. By controlling rats, you helped improve the reputation and livability of these communities, even if only slightly. As you innovate new traps and baiting strategies, rats find ways to evade capture. This cat and mouse game requires constant vigilance. You learn to read rat behavior, understand their breeding cycles, and anticipate their movements to stay one step ahead. This was important in cities where class divisions were sharp and opportunities for upward mobility limited. During cholera outbreaks, for example, rat-catching efforts intensified as people desperately sought ways to stop the spread. Although the understanding of cholera transmission evolved later, it was clear, even then, that filth and rats were enemies to be battled. By limiting rat populations, you helped reduce the incidence of outbreaks that could otherwise overwhelm local communities. You often became part of ongoing efforts to monitor and manage infestations, returning repeatedly to problem areas. This cyclical nature of the work meant that rat catching wasn't a quick fix, but a crucial part of a long-term public health strategy. This was especially true in poor neighborhoods, where disease was rampant and medical care scarce. Industrial towns were growing rapidly, their populations swelling with workers flocking to factories and tenements. Unfortunately, the rapid urbanization outpaced the development of proper sanitation systems. Every rat you trapped and removed was one less potential vector for disease. When rat populations became visibly overwhelming, it was harder for property owners to ignore the unsanitary conditions that allowed the rats to breed. Sometimes your work forced communities to confront these problems, leading to better waste disposal practices, improved drainage, and stronger regulations around cleanliness. You acted as a kind of living barrier between the filth that built up in crowded neighborhoods and the people who lived there. In many ways, you were a public health worker, even if you didn't wear a badge or receive official thanks. Waste piled up in the streets, sewers overflowed, and their close quarters made it easy for rats to thrive. Rats were notorious carriers of various pathogens, many of which could be transmitted to humans. By reducing rat populations, your work helped to slow the spread of these illnesses. Your presence also pushed landlords, factory owners, and city officials to pay attention to the broader issues of sanitation. The Industrial Revolution brought many challenges for public health, and rats were part of a much larger picture. You quickly learned that rats are both a symptom and a cause of poor sanitation. Where rats thrive, human health is often compromised. One of the challenges you faced was the persistence of rats. Your role also intersected with early sanitation reform movements. Figures like Edwin Chadwick and Joseph Bazalgette advocated for better sewage systems and cleaner cities. But these changes took time. The connection between rats and disease was further highlighted during epidemics, when fear and urgency prompted more focused efforts to control vermin. Your work required not just skill, but also courage and resilience. Moreover, your work had a social impact beyond health. Public health at this time was a patchwork effort involving many players, doctors, reformers, city officials, and workers like yourself. You also become aware of how your work influenced later public health policies. Still, challenges remained. Rats are clever and adaptable. You also notice the seasonal variations in rat populations and disease outbreaks. In many ways, your work helped save lives indirectly. Today, rat catching might seem a lowly or unpleasant task, but your historical role reveals a much deeper significance. Understanding your impact sheds light on how communities coped with the rapid urban growth of the 19th century and the struggles to improve public health. So next time you hear about the Victorian rat catcher, remember that beyond the grime and stench was a profession that played a critical role in protecting cities and their inhabitants. As a Victorian rat catcher, you quickly learn that your work never truly pauses. It changes with the seasons. Each time of year brings its own challenges and requires you to adapt your methods, timing, and strategies if you want to stay effective. You'll find them clustering closer to buildings, nesting inside walls, cellars, and beneath floors. This can be a double-edged sword. On one hand, their movements are more predictable since they concentrate around human habitations and food sources. On the other, these hiding places are often difficult and dangerous to access. As you crawl into dark, cramped cellars or squeeze behind pantry walls, you face cold, damp conditions that make your work physically taxing. They might prefer nibbling on discarded food scraps or garden plants instead of your carefully placed morsels. This requires you to be more creative with your lure choices, experimenting with richer or more pungent foods to outcompete natural sources. Sometimes the smell of cured fish or a strong cheese wedge works better than stale bread. But knowing where the rats congregate is a huge advantage. The heat drives rats to seek water sources, drawing them closer to open wells, leaky pipes, and water barrels. Outdoor traps might get hidden beneath leaf litter, making them harder to find and check. You inspect buildings carefully, looking for cracks and gaps that rats could use to enter warm spaces. You seal off potential entry points and advise residents on simple prevention measures, like storing food in sealed containers and keeping yards tidy. Wooden traps might warp or break in wet conditions, metal traps can rust, and bait can spoil quickly in heat. You keep a stock of different trap types and modify them with weatherproofing measures. In summer, complaints might focus on markets and outdoor areas. Your work is a continual battle against an ever-changing enemy shaped by the rhythms of nature. Success requires flexibility, knowledge, and a willingness to endure harsh conditions all year long. You tailor your communication, advice, and service offerings accordingly. Long, cold winters spent in darkness and mud. Hot, sticky summers filled with relentless activity. You develop a unique bond with the city's rhythms and the unseen creatures that share its streets. This cyclical struggle defines your profession as much as the traps and tools you carry. But knowing that your efforts directly protect public health and improve living conditions drives you forward. Building trust with the community helps you gain access to private properties and stay informed about new infestations. Innovation and maintenance are key to staying ahead of rats year-round and making the city a safer place to live, one rat caught at a time. Your role shifts slightly from pure rat catching to being a pest management advisor. You develop routines for clearing paths and marking trap locations so you don't lose track. The crisp weather can be invigorating, but also brings early morning fog and dampness, which creates slippery surfaces and affect your footing during night rounds. This increased activity around water supplies means you must monitor these areas closely. You learn to patrol near water access points and set traps where rats come to drink. During holidays, food waste tends to increase, attracting more rats. Markets overflowing with produce and scraps create hotspots of rat activity. You often have to coordinate with market managers to keep vermin in check during these busy times. The influx of visitors and vendors means your work becomes more visible and sometimes more pressured. However, summer heat also speeds up decomposition, so the risk of unpleasant odors and unsanitary conditions grows. You often find yourself working in stench-filled environments, from overflowing garbage bins to sun-baked markets. You know when they are more likely to be active dawn and dusk in summer, midday, and colder months. You learn to read subtle signs, fresh droppings, gnaw marks, disturbed nesting material. This knowledge helps you predict infestations before they escalate. Setting traps near their winter nests often yields better catches. You need to stay hydrated and pace yourself, especially when wearing the heavy clothing required for protection. Despite the discomfort, you understand that summer is a critical time to reduce rat populations before they breed again in the fall. Rats don't behave the same way in winter as they do in summer, and understanding these seasonal rhythms is crucial to surviving and thriving in your job. You use this opportunity to trap them in new locations, adapting your routes and strategies based on changing conditions. You notice increased scavenging activity, with rats becoming more aggressive in searching for stored grains, root vegetables, and scraps. This makes autumn a prime time for catching large numbers as they become more desperate and less cautious. Conversely, during dry spells, rats may burrow deeper or retreat to cooler shaded spots, requiring you to adjust trap placement accordingly. Their usual supplies outdoors vanish under snow and ice, so they become bolder in raiding homes, warehouses, and markets. You'll receive more calls from panicked residents spotting these hungry invaders. In response, you must increase your vigilance, checking traps frequently and using stronger bait. Sometimes you experiment with different lures, fat scraps, cured meat, or bread soaked in beer to entice rats desperate for a meal. Your success depends on patience and adapting to these shifting appetites. When winter arrives, the bitter cold drives rats to seek warmth and shelter. Winter also means food scarcity for rats. Traps set outdoors often get soaked or flooded, ruining bait and making devices less effective. Muddy alleys and waterlogged sewers slow your movement, making it harder to access prime hunting spots. You might need to improvise, constructing makeshift covers for traps or shifting focus to sheltered areas like barns and basements. Spring brings a fresh wave of challenges. As temperatures rise, rat populations explode. Breeding season kicks in, and you see more young, inexperienced rats flooding the streets. Their rapid reproduction means infestations can grow exponentially if unchecked. Your workload skyrockets, and the pressure to control these surging numbers mounts. Spring weather is unpredictable, alternating between sudden rainstorms and warm, sunny days. You find that rain complicates your efforts. The abundance of fresh vegetation in spring can sometimes distract rats from your bait. Summer is another testing time. The heat also affects your own endurance. Working long hours in hot, humid conditions is exhausting. Summer storms and occasional droughts add unpredictability. Heavy rain can flood sewers and drains, forcing rats to move to higher ground temporarily. Autumn arrives as a transition period. Rats start preparing for the harsh months ahead, gathering food and reinforcing nests. The falling leaves and cooler air also affect your work. Autumn is also the season when you prepare for winter's challenges. Throughout the year, seasonal festivals and market days add unique complications. The changing seasons also affect your equipment. Some traps perform better in certain weather. Beyond physical adaptations, you develop a deep understanding of rat behavior through the seasons. Seasonal shifts also affect your interactions with the community. In winter, residents are more desperate for your services as rats invade their homes seeking warmth. Despite these seasonal ups and downs, one truth remains constant. Rats are remarkably resilient and adaptive creatures. At times, the weight of the seasons feels overwhelming. In the end, the seasonal challenges of your work shape not only your tactics, but your character. You become resourceful, patient, and observant. By mastering the seasons, you become an indispensable guardian of Victorian urban life, quietly keeping disease at bay. You might not immediately think of rat catching as a business, but in Victorian England, it was very much an economic activity, one that required skill, negotiation, and sometimes even a bit of entrepreneurial spirit. Understanding how you earned a living as a rat catcher means diving into the financial realities, payment methods, contracts. There was no fixed salary or steady paycheck. Wealthy householders, shopkeepers, warehouses, and factories often hired rat catchers on a contractual basis to keep their premises free of rodents. These contracts might last for a few weeks, months, or even years, depending on the level of infestation and the client's budget. To secure such work, you had to build a reputation for reliability and results. For ongoing contracts, you might receive weekly or monthly payments. These jobs came with official backing and often steadier pay, but they also carried more scrutiny. You were expected to produce measurable results and report regularly to officials. Occasionally, you dealt in barter or goods instead of money. A sack of flour from a grateful baker, or a few eggs from a farmer. Success meant financial stability, but also more bureaucratic oversight. Some rat catchers resented these constraints, preferring the independence of private work. You had to budget for repairs and replacements, often from your own earnings. Economic downturns meant that some clients cut back on spending, delaying, or canceling contracts. Periods of plague or public health scares sometimes increased demand, but also heightened fears and stigmas around your profession. Investing wisely in high-quality tools was a balancing act. Cheaper equipment saved money up front, but could fail at crucial moments, damaging your reputation. Some resorted to undercutting prices, while others tried to differentiate themselves through specialized services or by offering faster response times. Sometimes you worked as a general handyman, using your knowledge of buildings and urban infrastructure to repair rat-proofing measures or advise clients on hygiene improvements. You learned to network with fellow catchers, sharing tips or dividing territories to avoid direct clashes. These alternative payments weren't always ideal, but could help you survive during lean times. There were no pensions or social safety nets. Illness, injury, or old age could abruptly end your ability to work. Some rat catchers saved what little they could or invested in small businesses or property to secure their families' futures. Instead, your income depended entirely on the number of rats you caught and the contracts you secured. This meant that your daily wages could fluctuate dramatically. Your daily grind involved more than just chasing rodents. It was navigating a complex web of clients, contracts, competition, and survival. Your earnings might never have made you wealthy, but they sustained a difficult trade that protected countless lives and shaped urban living. This allowed them to cover more ground and take on larger contracts. The physical toll and precarious earnings made it a tough life, but the independence and direct impact on the city's well-being gave a sense of purpose. Rat catching was often seen as dirty and low status. Some clients paid reluctantly or treated you poorly despite needing your services. Maintaining professionalism and pride in your craft helped you endure social prejudice. Managing a small team brought new responsibilities, including training, paying wages, and handling logistics. Some paid a flat fee for regular inspections and rat control, while others operated on a per-rat basis, rewarding you for each rodent you delivered alive or dead. Payment by the piece could be lucrative if rat populations were high, but it also meant that your income depended heavily on factors outside your control: weather, seasons, and the client's hygiene practices. These efforts could provide temporary financial boosts and raise your profile in the community. Success in such projects sometimes led to better contracts or official recognition. In sprawling industrial cities, you might rely on walking, cycling, or horse-drawn carts if you were fortunate. As cities expanded, so did the rodent populations, creating a steady demand for pest control. Factories, docks, rail yards, and markets were hotspots needing constant attention. You found yourself working in environments filled with noise, dirt, and danger, but your skills were essential. Keeping your gear mobile and accessible meant constant effort and expense. Some days were good, when a wealthy merchant or factory owner paid handsomely for your services. Other days were lean, spent roaming empty alleys and damp cellars with no reward. And the bustling market for pest control services that existed in crowded industrial cities. From the moment you decided to become a rat catcher, you faced uncertainty. One of your main sources of income came from private contracts. Charging too little risked undercutting your livelihood. Charging too much could cost you valuable clients. In a city teeming with rat catchers, competition was fierce. Word of mouth was critical. A good reputation could bring steady work, while rumors of poor results could leave you struggling to find employment. The contracts varied widely. You learned early on to negotiate your fees carefully. Payment methods were often informal. Many clients paid in cash, sometimes immediately upon completion of the job, sometimes after several weeks. Public contracts added another layer to your economic reality. Town councils and sanitation boards sometimes hired rat catchers to combat outbreaks or maintain hygiene standards in public spaces. Winning public contracts could be competitive, involving bids or political connections. Your equipment and tools represented a significant expense. Traps, cages, bait, and ferrets all required money to purchase and maintain. Transportation was another cost. You needed to move quickly between jobs, often carrying heavy traps and cages. The market for rat-catching services was driven by the rapid growth of urban centers. Yet the market was not without challenges. Competition among rat catchers shaped the economics further. In some districts, dozens of rat catchers vied for the same clients. You might also diversify your income by offering related services, pest control for mice, insects, or other vermin. Despite the hardships, rat catching could be a pathway to modest prosperity. Some skilled and well-connected catchers expanded their operations, hiring assistants or apprentices. In contrast, many rat catchers remained solitary workers, relying on their own endurance and expertise. You also had to manage the stigma associated with your work. At times, you collaborated with local authorities during public health campaigns. In terms of finances, you had to plan carefully for the future. Overall, the economics of rat catching in Victorian England demanded adaptability, shrewdness, and resilience. By mastering the financial side as well as the practical, you carved out a vital role in the city's fight against vermin. You didn't work alone, not really. Even if you walked the alleys by yourself, traps in one hand and a sack in the other, your work brought you into contact with nearly everyone in the neighborhood. These men, sometimes local, sometimes absentee, had a vested interest in keeping their buildings free of vermin. You had to be persuasive. Show them the damage, hint at what might happen if rats kept chewing. A single rat spotted by a customer could ruin a day's takings. You'd slip in through a back door, check for droppings behind flour sacks or gnawed corners beneath counters. Others feared that your very appearance, dusty clothes, the faint smell of vermin, the clink of traps might alert customers. Municipal authorities were responsible for the cleanliness and health of public spaces, alleys, markets, docks, and sewers. You had to bid for the job, prove your experience, sometimes even attend a meeting to explain your methods. This wasn't always easy. You weren't trained in paperwork, and some catchers simply exaggerated results. But if you were honest, and if your numbers looked good, you built a working relationship with inspectors and clerks. Some cities preferred more official sanitation workers, while others welcomed independent catchers who knew their way around the back streets. The ones who lived with rats every day, who heard them scratching in the walls at night, who saw their children jump when one darted from under the table. You became a familiar face in their lives. There were even stories, usually false, about rat catchers breeding rats in secret, keeping a supply to release into wealthier homes. If you said you'd clear out a cellar, you had to do it. During outbreaks or infestations, people gathered to watch you work. Children whispered about your ferrets. Women asked if rats could climb stairs. Men offered theories about where the rats came from. You listened, nodded, and answered patiently. Others viewed you as a necessary evil, someone who worked in filth and should be kept at arm's length. Aristocratic homes didn't want to admit to rat problems, yet they had them just the same, especially in their pantries. wine cellars, and stables. And you always left the place better than you found it. These jobs paid well, but they required discipline and tact. You were judged not just on your results, but on your discretion. You had to enter quietly, sometimes after dark, through side doors. You were expected to be invisible and thorough. You attended services when you could, dressed neatly, and greeted your neighbors. You reminded people you were one of them. Part of your job was education. The more people understood rats, their habits, their weaknesses, the better your work went. The rat catcher who knew everyone's secrets and never told. And your pockets were full of clinking coins. You knew this. You weren't just working with rats. You were working with people. And people were often the trickiest part of all. You learned how to keep everyone satisfied, or at least not angry. It wasn't just about rats. It was about trust. If you said a building was rat-free, it had to stay that way. On being the person people called when something skittered across the floor in the middle of the night. On being reliable, even when no one else wanted the job. On being part of the community, even when people held their noses as you passed. Word traveled fast in tight communities, especially among the working class. A satisfied family meant 10 new recommendations. A single complaint could cost you a whole street. You never did such a thing, but the rumors lingered. When rat populations surged, or when public concern rose after a newspaper article, or a local outbreak of illness, city officials called in professionals. They'd follow you from house to house, begging to carry the cage or see a trap. Some families offered you tea or a scrap of bread. Newspapers occasionally printed stories about rat catchers, sometimes praising your bravery, sometimes mocking your profession. If a reporter followed you for a day, you tried to be on your best behavior. Publicity could help, but it could also expose flaws. Others barely opened the door, whispering behind the curtains as you passed. Your trade wasn't glamorous, but it was necessary, and most people respected that. You hoped to be one of them. You had to walk a fine line, always respectful, always discreet. Over time, you became as much a counselor as a catcher. You offered advice on food storage, sealed entry points, and even rearranged stock to keep rats away from grain or sugar. If you found signs, you set your traps, brought out the cages, and reassured the owner. But if you didn't, you still left your calling card, just in case. Better safe than sorry, you'd say. Preventative visits earn trust, and sometimes even small retainers. Infestations weren't just annoying, they were dangerous to reputation. You understood this well, and you used it to your advantage. If you failed to produce results quickly, city officials might cut off the contract. These men, dressed more formally and carrying notebooks, would walk the route with you, asking questions, peering over your shoulder. You learned how to answer them quickly and clearly, without sounding defensive. You learned, too, to show them only what you wanted them to see. Or worse, accuse you of making things worse, deliberately encouraging infestations to extend your job. You had to protect your name constantly. A bad reputation could mean losing access to half the city overnight. And most of all, offer a price that made the problem seem solvable. If you built trust, if you proved that you could deliver, many would call you back time and again, your name scribbled in a ledger or whispered between neighbors. Rats meant chewed floorboards, stolen food, frayed linens, and complaints from tenants. Infestations could cost them rent money or even lead to inspections and fines. So they came to you. Or more accurately, you sought them out. You had to know how to deal with all types. Landlords who wanted results but didn't want to pay much. Shopkeepers with reputations to protect. Housewives with opinions and suspicions. And city officials with clipboards and expectations. As a Victorian rat catcher, your job was more than just catching rats. It was about managing people. Let's start with the landlords. You learned which landlords managed multiple buildings, which ones were stingy, which ones only called in help when the problem was too large to ignore. Businesses were a different matter. Grocers, bakers, and warehouse owners were often on edge. You'd make your rounds early in the morning or late at night, when shops were closed and the streets were quiet. Of course, not all business owners welcomed your presence. Some were proud, unwilling to admit there was a problem. Your relationship with the city was more formal, more complex. Landing a municipal contract was no easy task. Once hired, you were expected to report in. You kept records, where you placed traps, how many rats you caught, what evidence of nests or burrows you discovered. Sometimes, though, tensions flared. In some cases, you worked side by side with city inspectors or public health officers. And then there were the communities themselves. The people. Children often watched you work with fascination, especially when you used ferrets. Still, suspicion followed you. People wondered if you brought rats with you to justify your pay. They watched to see if rats followed you home. That meant your reputation mattered more than anything. You couldn't afford to cut corners. There were moments when you became a kind of public figure. Your relationship with the press was mixed. Church leaders had opinions too. Some encouraged your work, linking cleanliness to godliness. In wealthier areas, your work became even more delicate. There, you learned to work fast, clean, and quiet. You didn't linger. You didn't speak unless spoken to. Over time, your web of relationships grew. You knew which inspectors were lenient, which landlords paid late, which shopkeepers tipped well. Your survival depended on that trust. You were, in a way, both outsider and insider, respected and feared, necessary but rarely celebrated. And at the end of the day, when your traps were empty, you didn't always have the tools you use now. If you'd been born just a few decades earlier, your entire trade would have looked very different. Your father or uncle might have handed down a wooden trap, a well-worn cage, and maybe even a ferret trained by hand over many seasons. These tools worked, but they demanded experience. You had to know where to place them, how to bait them, and when to check them. But for you, they were another option, something to combine with other methods. You didn't abandon the old ways. You added to them. Early in your career, you may have relied mostly on brute force, setting traps wherever rats were spotted, hoping for the best. You placed traps along known runways, used flour on the floor to track movements, even mapped out common nest sites in different types of buildings. A bakery had different patterns than a brewery. A rural cottage was not the same as a city tavern. Your expertise became strategic, but over time, you became more methodical. You studied rat behavior more closely. It took skill to set a trap, work with ferrets, and understand the rhythms of an infestation. There was pride in the older ways, even as the new methods gained popularity. You observed that rats followed the same paths night after night, that they avoided open spaces, that they often lived in groups and not alone. Pamphlets began to appear warning of the dangers of rats, not just to food stores, but to health. Rats were linked more clearly to disease. As a result, the general public grew more accepting of rat catchers and more willing to follow your advice. On one side, independent catchers like yourself, still walking the streets, still carrying ferrets and traps. On the other, emerging pest control companies with uniforms, branded carts, and chemical supplies. They charged more, but they had the backing of new science and the ear of the wealthy. Some called them the future. Others said they'd lost the personal touch. You found yourself giving instructions: seal this gap. Don't leave food uncovered. Clear your cellar regularly. But you never lost sight of what made your trade unique. The knowledge passed down, the instincts sharpened by years in cellars and courtyards, and the quiet satisfaction of doing a job most wouldn't touch. During your time, chemical fumigants became more common. Sulfur dioxide, for example, could be burned in enclosed spaces to kill or flush out rats. Whether using a wooden box, a steel spring, or a powder from a chemist's jar, you hunted the same creature. It was a craft, and crafts are always changing, always growing, but never truly disappearing. And you knew, better than anyone, that innovation didn't mean forgetting the past. It meant building on it. These methods were dangerous. You had to wear a cloth over your mouth, avoid breathing in too deeply, but they were effective in abandoned buildings or heavily infested basements. Wire mesh became widely available, allowing for better sealing of homes. Trap design improved dramatically, with multi-catch systems that allowed you to capture several rats without resetting. And in some larger institutions, people began experimenting with sound and vibration to drive rodents away, though these early systems were clumsy and unreliable. You may have used them sparingly, preferring more direct methods when possible. A careless mistake, a poorly set trap, or a wrongly timed release meant lost rats or injured animals. Precision was everything. If you worked under a contract for a public agency, you had to keep notes. How many rats caught, where, using which method. This pushed some rat catchers to adopt more systematic approaches. You were an advisor, a sanitation expert, a necessary presence in the modernizing city. You began to think like a scientist, in a way testing what worked, adjusting methods, learning from each job. These nimble, fearless creatures could be sent down holes, into walls, beneath floorboards. You trained them patiently, teaching them to flush out rats, but not chase too far or bite too hard. A good ferret could make the difference between a successful job and a wasted day. Early on, poison wasn't common, partly because it was dangerous, partly because it was imprecise. Arsenic or strychnine could kill a rat, yes, but it could also sicken a child, a pet, or even yourself. And poisoned rats often died in walls, filling homes with a stench that lingered for days. For many years, poison was considered a desperate last resort. You learned how to carry them, tucked in soft cloth, calm and curious, and how to coax them back if they got lost in the dark. These were sold in small packets, often under grand names like Ratbane or Rodent Destroyer. They were advertised in newspapers, endorsed by sanitation officers, and increasingly used by large institutions, factories, warehouses, even hospitals. You might have started incorporating them into your work, especially when dealing with large infestations. You learned to mix the poison with food in a way that wouldn't arouse suspicion in the rats. But still, you remained cautious. A single mistake could have tragic consequences. The Victorian rat catcher wasn't simply a relic from some unchanging past. Your profession, though rooted in older traditions, was evolving rapidly. These traps were reusable and allowed you to catch rats alive, which had value, especially if you sold them later for sport or to rat pits. Metal traps began to appear, especially spring-loaded snap traps that promised faster kills and easier resetting. At first, they were expensive and not always reliable. Some snapped too lightly, letting the rat escape. Others crushed but didn't kill, leaving a bloody mess you had to clean up. Still, over time, designs improved. Manufacturers started producing these traps in larger quantities, and soon you could buy a dozen at the local ironmongers instead of fashioning your own. You'd bait them with bits of bacon rind, oats, or rotting cheese, depending on what was available. Setting them required patience and observation. You learned to read the signs: droppings, chewed corners, faint trails through dust. You knew where to lay the trap for maximum effect. With each passing year, tools got sharper, traps got cleverer, and knowledge about rats and how to control them expanded. The job you did was shaped by both necessity and innovation. At the beginning of the Victorian era, most rat catchers still relied on age-old tools. One of your most trusted tools was the live catch trap, often a simple but cleverly designed wooden box with a pressure plate or door triggered when a rat stepped inside. But by the mid-19th century, new materials changed the game. Not everyone liked the snap traps. Some rat catchers saw them as crude, inelegant, or even cruel. Ferrets, of course, remained indispensable. Your forebears had used them for centuries. Some innovations came not in tools, but in technique. This knowledge transformed your work. Instead of reacting to infestations, you learned to predict them. Another major evolution during the Victorian era was the development of poisons. But by the latter part of the 19th century, commercial rodenticides began to appear. Some rat catchers refused to use poison altogether. They argued that it undermined their craft. Anyone could throw down bait laced with poison. Another technique that evolved was smoking or fumigation. In the past, people had tried to drive rats from holes by burning straw or using pungent herbs. Throughout this period, you also saw a shift in record-keeping and inspection. City officials started demanding results. One surprising innovation came in the form of public education. Your role expanded. You weren't just a pest remover anymore. Toward the end of the century, you began to see even more advanced innovations. You watched the profession split in two. You kept working. You adapted. Maybe you incorporated some of their methods. Maybe you didn't. Your toolkit changed, yes. Your techniques evolved, but your purpose remained the same. Because at the end of the day, rat catching wasn't just a profession. You're crouched low beside a cracked wall behind a bakery in Whitechapel. The smell of warm bread mingles with the sharp scent of mold and damp stone. They're about the people who hire you, the places you go, and the strange moments that shape each day. The rats were thick as fog down there, darting between sacks of grain and barrels of salt fish. You and your assistant worked in silence, your ferrets slipping into the darkness like arrows. Like the crumbling theater in Southwark, where you spent an entire week trying to clear the basement beneath the stage. The rats were using the old orchestra pit as a nest, and you'd hear them scuttling beneath your feet while the actors rehearsed above. One night, as you were checking traps, a trapdoor creaked open and a young actress peeked down, holding a lantern. She wasn't frightened, just curious, like your favorite ferret whistle. The ones who offered you a cup of tea with your payment. Like pretending to see rats you hadn't yet spotted, just to calm a nervous landlord. Each street had its own rhythm. Some were friendly, others suspicious. You remembered them, the way they leaned in to whisper about where they saw the rat, the way their hands shook when they showed you the chewed edge of a loaf or the paw prints in dust. Fear had a pattern. So did relief. You became an expert in both. You learned to tell the difference by the way doors opened or didn't. Other days, one surprises you. A leap through a gap you thought too small, or a gnawed hole in a place no rat should reach. It's humbling. They're clever, and so are you. But they have time on their side, not because the rats are gone for good. They never are. But because for now, someone can sleep in peace. And in a world full of noise and shadows, that's worth something. All they need is for someone to stop paying attention. That's when they come back. By the way someone said your name, or didn't bother. You move from job to job, alley to alley, house to house. People nod as you pass now. Sometimes they wave. You're not glamorous, not honored, not written about in books, but you're needed. Or placing old droppings in a more visible spot to prove the infestation was real, just in case a tenant accused you of making it up. Not exactly dishonest, you told yourself. Just ... persuasive. The ones who asked about your ferrets remembered their names and thanked you properly. There weren't many like that, but you remembered every one. Like the widow who ran the bookshop near Holborn. You'd cleared her cellar of rats in one long afternoon, and as you came upstairs, she handed you a biscuit tin with a ribbon around it. Inside were shortbread, 2 shillings, and a note that simply read, "You made my home quiet again." A white-furred, bright-eyed rascal with a curious nose and more cleverness than some of the apprentices you'd trained. Whistle had a knack for finding nests in the oddest places, once leading you through a hidden panel in a mill's storeroom to a nest tucked between two loose bricks. He had a favorite cap he liked to curl up in after work, and when he passed on, it was the only time you ever wept over a coworker. Rival rat catchers who left their cards nailed to doors you'd just worked at. You knew most of them by sight. Old John with the limp young Callie with her band of ferrets trained to come to a whistle, and Silent Thomas who never spoke unless it was to demand coin. You didn't hate them. They were just trying to survive, same as you. Do you think they listened to the music? She asked with a smirk. You weren't sure what to say. Maybe they did. You left that night exhausted, clothes torn and shoes soaked, but not a single rat remained. Like the butcher's shop in Deptford, where a rat dashed out midday, a woman had screamed that something had bashed across her parlor floor. You arrived promptly, examined the tracks, and followed the trail only to find a hedgehog tucked under a sideboard, snoozing peacefully. You returned it to her garden, received your tuppence, and left shaking your head. Pest control, you murmured, of all kinds, and sent a customer leaping into the display, window toppling a stack of sausages and knocking over 3 jars of pickled eggs. The butcher laughed until tears ran down his cheeks, even as he handed you a broom and asked you to finish the job before the next customer came in. The dock workers gave you a rare cheer as you walked out, one of the few times your work was met with applause. Like the time you were called to a manor house in Kensington. Once, you were in a large boarding house where the infestation had reached every floor. The rats were in the walls, the cupboards, even the chimneys. The landlady had grown so accustomed to them, she hardly flinched anymore. But the tenants, mostly poor laborers, were angry, convinced that rats were the reason for their constant illnesses. You spent 3 days there, laying traps, checking droppings, setting out bait laced with powder. It worked eventually. The infestation thinned, but you knew it would return. The real problem wasn't the rats. It was the rot in the walls, the broken windows, the holes in the floorboards. Rats just followed neglect. The lady of the house greeted you with a handkerchief pressed over her nose, her voice trembling with horror. She swore she saw a rat in her kitchen, the size of a cat. You smiled politely, though you knew well enough that exaggeration was the usual companion of panic. When you finally found the creature curled under a pantry shelf, it was nothing more than a juvenile. But you didn't correct her. You simply held it up with tongs and nodded as if it were a monster sling. Your fingers rest on the rim of your wire cage trap, baited with scraps and ready to snap. Your ferret small, wriggling, and eager waits in a worn leather pouch tied to your belt. You've done this hundreds of times, and yet no 2 jobs are ever quite the same. The rats, clever as they are, always find new ways to surprise you. And sometimes, so do the people. The stories you carry aren't always about rats. Then there was the time you visited the docks. The warehouse master had promised a half-shilling bonus if you could clear the entire cellar in a single afternoon. Sometimes the stories weren't so easy to tell. Once, in the East End, you were crawling through a tenement cellar when a boy no older than 9 tapped your shoulder. He lived in the building above, and he offered to help for a slice of bread. He was scrawny, barefoot, his shirt hanging like rags. You let him follow you, gave him a spare trap, and showed him how to place it. He was quiet but quick, learning the rhythm of the hunt faster than most grown men. You gave him the bread when it was over, and he wolfed it down without thanks, but with a glance of gratitude so deep it stayed with you for days. Other times, it was the buildings that left an impression. There was humor, too. And then there was the time you caught a rat that wasn't a rat, but it wasn't always so light. Sometimes it was the animals themselves that told the most interesting stories. And then there were the shopkeepers. You also remember the tricks you had to pull. You've seen more cellars than you can count, and more frightened faces than you care to remember. But it was all part of the job. There were competitions too. Over time, the stories blurred. One rat run became like the next. One alley looked much like another. But the people made the difference. Some days, you think you've seen every trick a rat can pull. So you keep your boots laced, your ferret fed, and your traps ready. And every so often, when a job is finished and the night is quiet, you let yourself smile. You don't think much about rats anymore. Not really. When you see one dash across a city street, or hear someone complain about them in a back alley behind a restaurant, you don't grab a ferret or set a spring trap. And yet, in many ways, your legacy is everywhere. It's written in the standards of public health, in the laws that require buildings to be sealed and trash to be collected. It's in the uniforms of pest control workers, in the tools they use, and in the understanding that vermin aren't just nuisances, they're signals. But the most progressive towns look to people like you to help build the first professional vermin control units. In some places, former rat catchers were hired as consultants or inspectors. You may not have worn a white lab coat, but your decades of practical knowledge about behavior, prevention, and environment became the core of something much larger. Signals that something's broken in the balance between people and the spaces they live in. And typhus weren't well understood in your day. People had theories, miasmas, bad air, filth. Dogs, for example, are now trained to sniff out rats in large storage facilities. The idea of using nature to fight nature, something you did with ferrets, has returned, this time with science behind it. Garbage had to be removed regularly and sealed. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. The figure of the rat catcher became a kind of urban folklore. Children read about you in books. You were the unsung hero of city life, grimy, overlooked but essential. Artists painted you. Writers wrote about you. In some towns, old rat catchers were even honored with plaques or museum exhibits, not because you were famous, but because you were a symbol of survival. They don't know it, but that name, that reputation, that work, it's a tribute to you. And every one of those reforms carried echoes of your trade. You learned the city by its shadows. But deep down, they'll be acting on the foundation you laid. A legacy born not of fame or fortune, but of necessity, grit, and generations of silent service. You faced what others feared. You cleared paths not only through vermin, but through ignorance. You helped cities become livable, one trap at a time. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, so you don't miss future deep dives into strange and forgotten lives from the past. We've got plenty more stories coming your way, from the darkest corners of Victorian cities to the icy reaches of forgotten expeditions. You forced them to look at what they'd rather pretend wasn't there. London, New York, Paris each has entire departments dedicated to rodent control. They map infestations, track behavior, test new deterrents. Some even use data science to predict outbreaks before they happen. But in corners of the world, in barns and fields, they're still used, still slipping through tunnels and holes, still chasing after the unseen. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't clean. But without these brave, persistent individuals working behind the scenes in the shadows of the city, life in industrial England might have been far worse. Their work helped shape modern pest control, raised awareness of public hygiene, and taught us that even the most forgotten roles in history can have a lasting impact. Like you once did, the tools are new, but the mission is the same. Protect the city by understanding its smallest, most elusive threats. Or maybe a topic you'd love us to explore next. Drop a comment below. I read them all. You made it clear that a rat infestation wasn't just a pest problem. It was a symptom of something deeper: poverty, neglect, overcrowding. Your job, once dismissed as dirty work for the desperate, is recognized as a forerunner to public health innovation. You didn't solve those things, but you made them visible. But as medical science advanced, so did the understanding of rats as vectors. Today's pest control professionals use ultrasonic repellents, chemical baits, digital monitors, and motion sensors. But the basic principles haven't changed. You still have to know the rat's habits. You still have to understand why it came in the first place. And you still have to outsmart it. The realization that fleas on rats could carry deadly bacteria changed everything. It turned your dirty, dangerous job into a critical line of defense. You probably call a pest control company, or more often, someone else does it for you. But you were part of the city's immune system responding to the symptoms of its decay. The city couldn't function without you, though it rarely said thank you. The idea of bait shyness, for example, the way rats learn to avoid poisoned food after seeing others die from it, was something you figured out long before textbooks did. You knew to change your bait, move your traps, and never underestimate a rodent's memory. Still, your work laid the foundation for what would become an organized system of public pest control. But the roots of that profession, and the entire way we think about urban cleanliness, trace back to the very job you once lived and breathed, the work of the Victorian rat catcher. When you look back on those days working the back streets, crawling through crumbling floorboards, checking traps by lantern light, it's hard to believe how far things have come. Back in your day, no one called it urban vermin management. You were just the rat catcher. It started slowly. As cities grew in the late 1800s and early 1900s, officials began to realize that swarming rats weren't just gross, they were dangerous. They spread disease, gnawed through grain stores, and created panic among the public. But it took time before city councils and public health boards saw pest control as a responsibility. Before that, it was people like you, independent, often underpaid, often unlicensed, who did the heavy lifting. You knew the alleyways like the back of your hand. You knew what traps worked in damp cellars and how to track a rat by the scratches it left on wood. You knew when a tenant was lying about how clean their flat was, and you knew when the Lord just didn't care. Eventually, your know-how started to catch the attention of larger organizations. Cities began to regulate waste disposal more tightly. Sanitation workers became more common. And then came science. The diseases linked to rats, like the plague. As this knowledge spread, public health initiatives began to take your work and elevate it into policy. Buildings were required to be rat-proofed. Food storage laws were passed. The tools changed, too. You worked with spring traps, wire cages, wooden clubs, and ferrets. In fact, some of the techniques you used, those passed down from rat catcher to rat catcher, are still taught in modern training programs. Even the use of animals, which seemed quaint or old-fashioned in the mid-20th century, has seen a resurgence in some places. Your legacy isn't just technical, though. It's cultural, and then there's the psychological legacy. You taught people not to ignore what scurries beneath their floorboards. You'd be surprised, perhaps, to know how seriously modern cities take rats now. There are museums that mention you now glass cases, showing your old traps, diagrams of your techniques, black and white photographs of men in flat caps holding up cages. And what of the ferrets? Your little companions, once essential to your daily work, are now more likely to be seen as pets than partners. Sometimes, when someone hires a modern pest control company, they might catch a glimpse of your legacy in the name of the business. Old Town Rodent Service or the Ratman & Co. You walked through fog and filth with a purpose. The rats never went away entirely. They never will. But thanks to you, we learned how to live alongside them without surrendering to them. So the next time someone hears a scratching in the wall or sees a flash of brown fur in a subway tunnel, maybe they'll call a professional. Maybe they'll look up prevention tips. And that, in the end, may be the most lasting kind of legacy there is. And there you have it, a full glimpse into the overlooked, underappreciated world of the Victorian rat catcher. If you enjoyed diving into this fascinating slice of the past, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps more history lovers find this content. Got a favorite fact from today's video? Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay curious.